John Ernst Worrell Keely was born on September 3, 1827 in Pennsylvania. He was orphaned in early childhood and worked a variety of jobs as a young man. This included stints as a circus performer, painter, carpenter, a theatrical orchestra performer, carnival barker, and a mechanic. In 1873 he announced that he had discovered a new physical force, one that, if harnessed, would produce unheard-of power. He claimed, for example, to be able to produce from a quart of water enough fuel to move a 30-car train from Philadelphia to New York City. He began construction of an engine to perform this feat and by 1874 was able to give preliminary demonstrations of his machine. A stock company was formed for the purpose of supplying funds for the perfection and promotion of the discovery. Keely built and destroyed many models, gave exhibitions at which numerous remarkable and unexplained effects were produced. John Keely may well have been one of the greatest scientific inventors of all time. He is listed in the encyclopedia as a fake and imposter who tried to hoodwink the public and scientific establishment of his day. We will explore some of Keely's discoveries and why there was such a great effort to discredit him, especially after his supposed death in 1898. John Keely made his first discovery using his perfect pitch hearing by filing down seashells that he mounted on a windmill-like apparatus. The seashells actually ran the windmill by the correct sound that he had tuned them to when he filed them down with a file. The windmill didn't run by wind, the windmill ran by sound when he played his flute. All he did was play the exact tone on his flute that he tuned the seashells to, and the resonance started the seashell sound mill into motion. No wind was needed. This is called Helmholtz resonance propulsion. John Keely's remote-controlled flying saucer. It was a warm summer evening in the late 1880s in the elegant city of Philadelphia. The rays of the setting sun were reflected from the fine pink and white marble public buildings set in their lush green parks. But the crowd that was crammed into an engineering workshop on the edge of the city had no eye for the beauty that could be glimpsed distantly through the dusty, cracked windows. A small space in the center of the workshop was occupied by a cloth-covered table. On it stood a strange machine, a complex structure of metal plates and tubing in the form of a disc. A long wire connected it to a staple on the table. The buzz of conversation was hushed for a few seconds as a man pushed his way through the crowd to the table. Then the noise swelled up again, reinforced by great gusts of laughter from the audience. It wasn't the newcomer's appearance that caused so much merriment. Oblivious of all the noise, the violinist took up his instrument and tucked it under his chin. He gazed at the ceiling for a few seconds, then drew the bow across the strings. The first couple of notes were lost against the barrage of laughter and jeers that came from the audience. Then these died away to be replaced by open mouths and looks of total incomprehension. The audience sat stunned as they gazed at the incredible spectacle that was taking place only a few feet from their eyes. For in response to a note played on the violin, the metal disc had begun rising from the table. As the note died away, the disc started to sink again before another note sent it soaring towards the roof. Now came a flurry of short, sharp strokes which sent it skimming over the heads of the astonished Philadelphians. A wild, unearthly tune followed with the metal shape darting and diving here, there, everywhere, its every movement seemingly controlled by the violinist as he plucked and sawed away at his strings. After several minutes of this astounding performance, the musician played a long, dying note which slowly returned the silvery craft to its original position on the table. There was silence for a few seconds and then pandemonium broke loose. The Quakers so far forgot themselves as to shout and cheer. The businessmen pounded each other on the back and talked of the profits to be made from public displays of this startling invention. The academics talked excitedly amongst themselves. Those nearest to the violinist shook him cordially by the hand as he walked out through the door. The triumphant smile on his face was only momentarily checked by the quickly hushed shouts of "swindler" and "cheat" from the back of the workshop. John Worrell Keely, the man at the center of this extraordinary demonstration, was born on September 3, 1827. Both of his parents had died while he was still a baby, and he spent a great deal of his time alone. Music was in his blood. He was the grandson of a well-known German conductor, and he soon became interested in the study of sound and vibrations. Keely said in later years, "Before I had reached my 10th year, researching in the realm of acoustic physics had a perfect fascination for me. My whole organism seemed attuned as if it were a harp of 1,000 strings." To provide money for his researches, Keely got together and conducted a small orchestra. After this, the necessity to build apparatus to test his revolutionary theories of etheric vibration led to his becoming a journeyman carpenter. It was not till 1873, when he was 46, that Keely announced the discovery of a new motive power that used sound waves, a power which he claimed was hundreds of times more effective than steam or electricity. A demonstration he gave in his workshop, the first of dozens, of a motor driven by the new force was a tremendous success. It convinced local businessmen that right on their own doorstep was an inventive genius comparable with Edison. Thousands of dollars poured in to provide the finance for Keely's researches, and the Keely Motor Company was formed to exploit the amazing discovery. In the spring of 1890, Keely succeeded in raising the metal weight composing his airship model, by means of a force still unknown to science. One of his friends stated, "When he has gained as perfect control of it as we now have over steam, airships weighing thousands of tons can easily traverse the highways of the air. He has gained control of the mysterious polar current to that extent that he has been able to exhibit on the thirds or molecular graduation of the propeller of his airship, 120 revolutions per minute, and on the sixths or atomic graduation, 360 revolutions per minute. He still has the etheric field to conquer." Keely says, by exciting the metallic mass composing a navigator of any given weight, it may be suspended and propelled. The vibratory neutral negative attraction evolved will bring it into perfect commercial control by keeping it in sympathy with the Earth's polar stream. This is why he sought to find the sympathetic connection between luminous ether, or inflowing celestial streams, and the radiating or terrestrial streams, which, by their interaction, solar tensions against terrestrial condensations, cause the polar current and its kindred phenomena. While he used sympathetic negative attraction for running machinery, he sought to use for aerial navigation another force, a negation of sympathetic negative attraction, or the same force that regulates the recession of the planets from each other. This is probably simply polar propulsion, although he terms this elsewhere as gravity. The power of the terrestrial propulsive and celestial attractive is to lift, and of the celestial propulsive and terrestrial attractive is to descend. Certain polar or antipolar vibrations can intensify either of these qualities so as to cause either of them to predominate. Intensifying the celestial will cause a metallic mass to rise with a speed proportionate to the concentration of the dominant bearing on the negative thirds of its mass chords, thereby inducing high neutral radiation together with celestial attraction. An airship of any number of tons weight can, when my system is completed, float off into space with a motion as light as thistledown, or with a velocity out-rivaling the cyclone. With the force of corpuscular bombardment, its movements can be as varied as is necessary for commercial use at any desired elevation and at any speed. Taken from the Snell manuscript, 1934. Levitating gyroscopes. John Ernst Worrell Keely, 1894. A small instrument, having 3 gyroscopes as a principal part of its construction, is used to demonstrate the facts of aerial navigation. These gyroscopes are attached to a heavy, inert mass of metal, weighing about 1 ton. The other part of the apparatus consists of tubes, enclosed in as small a space as possible, being clustered in a circle. These tubes represent certain chords, which were coincident to the streams of force acting upon the planet, focalizing and defocalizing upon its neutral center. The action upon the molecular structure of the mass lifted was based upon the fact that each molecule in the mass possessed a north and south pole, more strictly speaking, a positive and negative pole, situated through the center, formed by the three atoms which compose it. No matter which way the mass of metal is turned, the poles of the molecule point undeviatingly to the polar center of the Earth, acting almost exactly as the dip needle when uninfluenced by extraneous conditions, electrical and otherwise. The rotation of the disks of the gyroscopes produces an action upon the molecules of the mass to be lifted, reversing their poles, causing repulsion from the Earth in the same way as like poles of a magnet repel each other. This repulsion can be diminished and increased according as the mechanical conditions are operated. By operating the three disks, starting them at full speed, then touching two of them, so as to bring them, according to the tone they represented by their rotation, to a certain vibratory ratio, the weight then slowly sways from side to side, leaves the floor, rising several feet in the air, remaining in that position, and as the disks gradually decrease their speed of rotation, the weight sinks to the floor, settling down as lightly as thistledown. Where one molecule can be lifted, there need be no limit as to the number in a structure that may be operated upon as easily as one. The vessel in contemplation, the aerial navigator, will be over 200 feet long, over 60 feet in diameter, tapering at both ends to a point, made of polished steel, and will be capable of being driven under the power of dipolar repulsion, at the rate of 300 miles an hour. It can be far more easily controlled than any instrument now in use for any phase of transit. Another very remarkable feature connected with this system of aerial navigation is that the vessel is not buoyed up or floated in the air through the medium of the air, so that if there were no atmosphere it would float just as readily, hence, under mechanical conditions most certainly capable of production. Involving massive strength of resistance to interstellar vacuity, this can be made capable of navigating even the remote depth of space, positions between planets where polarity changes, being controlled by other adjuncts of concentration for that purpose. Safely enclosed within this structure, a man possessing the chemical knowledge these new laws give, with sufficient supply of material from which to make oxygen, by the enormously increased rate of speed attained by such navigator where atmospheric friction is avoided, the time occupied in traveling from one planet to another would be amazingly brief, and one can travel to other planets in this system of worlds as easily as the same ship could navigate the depths of the ocean. The great obstacle hitherto preventing the solution of this problem has been the strength of structure needed under conditions above presented. With this knowledge of matter, the size of structure is unimportant, the heaviest can be as easily controlled as the lightest. From Dashed Against the Rock, by William Colville, 1894. Gravity and Keely's aerial propeller, the basis for the cries of fraud centered around the finding of a large hollow iron sphere hidden under the floorboards of Keely's laboratory. After Keely's untimely death, several investigators from Scientific American went to Keely's old laboratory looking for evidence to support their fraud thesis. They thought they had found what they were looking for when they lifted a couple of floorboards and found a large, 4 feet in diameter, cast iron sphere from which protruded pieces of broken pipe. The sphere was estimated to weigh 6,625 pounds and have a bursting strength of 28,000 pounds per square inch. This event revived the charge brought against him during his lifetime of using compressed air to perform his miraculous feats, which if true could have earned Keely a fortune from compressed air inventions. A newspaper article written while Keely was still living tells the story of the iron sphere. It seems that the newshound who wrote the article had gone to see Keely for possible newsworthy information. He found the inventor in his laboratory tearing a large hole in the floor. Keely greeted the reporter but did not seem to be in a talkative mood as he appeared quite busy. After enlarging the hole, Keely attached a strange belt with several mechanisms built into it to his waist. He then attached a thin wire leading from the belt to a large sphere resting in the corner of the laboratory. After a few moments of intense concentration by Keely, the ponderous globe slowly lifted a few inches from the floor. Keely then floated the iron sphere over to the hole in the floorboards and allowed the huge mass to settle gently to the ground below the floor level. After a few adjustments to the belt mechanism, Keely again seemed lost in rapt concentration. This time the globe slowly but inexorably settled itself into the earth, buried by the opposite of levitation, namely, supergravity. Keely had evidently caused the apparent mass of the sphere to increase to such an extent that it sank into the firm earth much as a heavy rock sinks into mud. The inventor told the reporter that he was merely making room in his lab and clearing away outmoded equipment. This demonstration of Keely's control of gravity should have put to bed forever the humbug about compressed air, but people believe pretty much as they want or are told to believe. Keely had used the sphere many years previous as a storage reservoir for etheric vapor, but improvements in force generation obsoleted the necessity for storage. He was by then able to conduct the force through specially treated wires made of precious metals. While Major Ricard Seaver, FRS, was in Philadelphia, he witnessed this same gravity belt in operation. The Major saw Keely move a large 500 horsepower vibratory engine from one part of his lab to another. The astounded engineer pronounced the feat impossible without the aid of a crane, which would have meant the removal of the roof of the laboratory. The gravity belt was but one step towards Keely's airship, or aerial navigator, as he called it. By 1896 Keely had perfected his system to the point where he had built and demonstrated his airship to the press as well as the War Department, now the Department of Defense. The craft was a circular platform about 6 feet in diameter. Mounted on it was a small stool placed before a keyboard. Attached to the keyboard were a collection of finely tuned resonation plates and vibratory mechanisms. Keely explained that when these plates were polarized with negative attraction, the craft would rise and float above the ground. The craft was now under the influence of the etheric polar current. By damping out certain notes, Keely caused the airship to accelerate to any desired speed. When the War Department witnessed his demonstration in an open field, the airship went from 0 velocity to 500 miles per hour within a few seconds. There were no acceleration effects to Keely, who was sitting before the keyboard on the stool in the open air and controlling the airship. The government officials, although impressed, could see no use for the complex device, so did not pursue the matter further. The Wright brothers did not demonstrate their airplane at Kitty Hawk, North Carolina, until 7 years later. The controlling mechanism consisted of a row of 100 vibratory bars representing the enharmonic and diatonic scales. When half of the bars were damped, the craft would move at 500 miles per hour. If all the bars were damped, gravity would resume control and the craft would settle to the earth. There were no moving parts in the ship's propelling mechanism. It was unaffected by weather as it could rise above any storm. The instrument for guiding the airship was distinctly different from the propelling feature. A vast improvement over greasy automobiles, noisy airplanes, and brute force space rockets which hadn't even been invented yet. You might think we have regressed instead of progressed in our so-called space age. Theory of vibratory lift for airships. All molecular masses of terrestrial matter are composed of the ultimate ether, from which all things originally emanated. They are sympathetically drawn towards the Earth's center as according to the density of their molecular aggregation minus their force or sympathetic outreach toward celestial association, in other words the celestial brain, flow as controlling terrestrial physical organisms, the celestial mind, the terrestrial matter. The sympathetic outflow from the celestial streams reaches the infinite depths of all the diversified forms of matter. Thus it is seen that the celestial brain, flow which permeates, to its atomic depths the terrestrial convolutions of all matter, forms the exact sympathetic parallel to the human brain, flow and the physical organism, a perfect connective link of controlling sympathy or sympathetic control. Under certain orders of sympathetic vibration, polar and antipolar, the attractive sympathies of either stream can be intensified so as to give the predominance to the celestial or to the terrestrial. If the predominance be given to the celestial to a certain degree on a mass of metal, it will ascend from the Earth's surface towards the etheric field with a velocity as according to the dominant concentration that is brought to bear on the negative thirds of its mass chords by inducing high radiation from their neutral centers in combination with the power of the celestial attractive. The power of the terrestrial propulsive and celestial attractive to lift, and these conditions reversed, or the celestial propulsive and the terrestrial attractive to descend. Associating these conditions with the one of corpuscular bombardment, it is evident to me with what perfection an airship of any number of tons weight can, when my system is completed, be controlled in all the varied movements necessary for complete commercial use, at any desired elevation, and at any desired speed. It can float off into atmospheric space as gentle in motion as thistledown, or with a velocity outrivaling a cyclone. Keely's first craft were based on an advanced gyroscope function. Following a demonstration of 13 levitating spheres at the Chicago World's Fair in 1893, Keely received funding to build his enormous airship. Its principle of operation is based on the neutral center. The craft is polar at both ends and neutral in the center. It was cigar-shaped and was capable of traveling into outer space. The early ships had no cloaking technology, and there were many sightings of the cigar-shaped Keely craft around this time. Mystery airships or phantom airships are a class of unidentified flying objects best known from a series of newspaper reports originating in the western United States and spreading east during late 1896 and early 1897. According to researcher Jerome Clark, airship sightings were reported worldwide during the 1880s and 1890s. Mystery airship reports are seen as a cultural predecessor to modern claims of extraterrestrial piloted flying saucer-style UFOs. Typical airship reports involve nighttime sightings of unidentified lights, but more detailed accounts reported ships comparable to an airship. The Sacramento Bee and the San Francisco Call reported the first sighting on November 18, 1896. Witnesses reported a light moving slowly over Sacramento on the evening of November 17 at an estimated 1,000-foot elevation. Some witnesses said they could see a dark shape behind the light. A witness named R.L. Lowry reported that he heard a voice from the craft issuing commands to increase elevation in order to avoid hitting a church steeple. Lowry added, in what was no doubt meant as a wink to the reader, that he believed the apparent captain to be referring to the tower of a local brewery, as there were no churches nearby. Lowry further described the craft as being powered by two men exerting themselves on bicycle pedals. Above the pedaling men seemed to be a passenger compartment, which lay under the main body of the dirigible. A light was mounted on the front end of the airship. Some witnesses reported the sound of singing as the craft passed overhead. In April 1897, John Halley and Adolph Wenck of Springfield, Illinois, reported a flying craft of a similar type whose pilot told them that it was a new invention flown at night to attract less attention. The pilot stated he had left Quincy, 100 miles to the west, only 30 minutes earlier, an impossibility for an aerial object of the time. Similar objects were reported in Indiana, where a crew were making on-the-spot repairs. The pilot was tracked down by the press in Martinville, where he made the statement that he had an airship in Brown County undergoing repairs and 3 machines flying in central states of the U.S. While many reports of the time are undoubtedly hoaxes dreamed up by local newspaper editors to increase circulation, there remain some tantalizing unexplained facts. Also in April 1897, for more than 30 minutes, a huge airship was witnessed by jurors, judges and lawyers who had gathered outside the courthouse in Harrison, Nebraska. It had a bright white light and colored lights around it, and was oval-shaped with a box-like structure hanging from it and a propeller at the stern. To this day, though well documented, there has been no explanation for the sights observed. The neutral center can best be visualized as a drain through which ether continually flows. The volume of the etheric flows throughout a structure are determined by the size of the neutral center opening, exactly like increasing or decreasing the size of the drain in a tank of water. Control of the flow of ether through this drain therefore determines the density and weight of a mass aggregation. The character, signature or virtual state pattern of the mass aggregation determines the nature of the interferences which present themselves to the flow of ether into the neutral center. This mass nature not only determines what the elemental structure of a mass aggregation will be but also the properties exhibited. By altering the frequencies and phase relationships of a mass, we can change the weight, density, and nature of the mass by reducing or increasing the neutral center opening to the flow of ether. Ether flow into a mass aggregate neutral center can effectively capture other mass aggregations, causing them to be caught in the greater flow, to create what is called gravity. Keely continues by explaining how he managed to take advantage of the neutral center principle to develop an engine which was intended to run on etheric force. In the conception of any machine heretofore constructed, the medium for inducing a neutral center has never been found. If it had, the difficulties of perpetual motion seekers would have ended, and this problem would have become an established and operating fact. It would only require an introductory impulse of a few pounds, on such a device, to cause it to run for centuries. In the conception of my vibratory engine, I did not seek to attain perpetual motion, but a circuit is formed that actually has a neutral center, which is in a condition to be vivified by my vibratory ether, and while under operation, by said substance, is really a machine that is virtually independent of the mass, or globe, and it is the wonderful velocity of the vibratory circuit which makes it so. Still, with all its perfection, it requires to be fed with the vibratory ether to make it an independent motor. Keely continues, the man who can, even in a simple way, appreciate this vast problem has been endowed by the Creator with one of the greatest gifts which he can bestow upon a mortal. It is well known that all structures require a foundation in strength according to the weight of the mass they have to carry, but the foundations of the universe rest on a vacuous point far more minute than a molecule. In fact, to express this truth properly, on an interetheric point, which requires an infinite mind to understand. To look down into the depths of an etheric center is precisely the same as it would be to search into the broad space of heaven's ether to find the end, with this difference, that one is the positive field, while the other is the negative field. Keely continues, in seeking to solve the great problems which have baffled me, from time to time, in my progressive researches, I have often been struck by the fact that I have, to all seeming, accidentally tripped over their solution. The mind of man is not infinite, and it requires an infinite brain to evolve infinite positions. My highest power of concentration failed to attain the results which, at last, seeming accident revealed.
We build this thing, I take old burned out street lights, we're using the experiment, we get dumpster loads of them from Lease Light in San Francisco. The street lights off of Van Ness Street. They pull them out every certain amount of months, and there's a whole dumpster full of them somewhere. There used to be. We put the street light in these monopolar fields that I just described from these coils, and the street light that we used for this experiment was the one we'd used previously for all of our spark gap experiments and everything, and something had started to transform with the bulb. We put this thing in the field within a matter of a minute or two of working the thing in the field. You have to be careful because they explode violently. Full galaxy appears inside the bulb, just like a picture of one of these Nova TV deals. You can spins, whole thing, the stars, the nebulas, the suns, all the colors of the rainbow is spinning inside a burned out street light and virtually powering and containing itself, which has gone beyond the Farnsworth. Now we have a whole astronomical creation floating around in a light bulb on a workbench, and then it explodes the bulb, but after it explodes the bulb, for like a tenth of a second, it's not long, it sits there without any bulb to contain it.
What is it? What's in it?
That's the creative force. This electrical monopolar field is how creation comes about. There is no evolution or any of that type of stuff. It's the electrical field at the time creates what exists, and it's always changing this way and that way. All living organisms are all based, just like all machines, are all based on the same mathematical function. Well, what I did is I built a radio transmission device based on Tesla's work, and I built a pair of them so it couldn't transmit. It could only focus in one spot. And there's a neutral plane. If you take two monopolar fields and point them at each other, there's this weird neutral plane between them, and it's kind of like an opening into another universe.
What was the frequency of this transmitter?
This one operated, the frequency's immaterial pretty much, but it's got to be an HF band. It operated at 3.3 megacycles.
All right.
The voltage was about 60,000 volts. The electrode area at each end was about maybe 15, 20 picofarads of capacitance. So basically the tube sat between the plates of a capacitor, so to speak.
Okay, so we're here at the shop with Eric Dollard, and we have one of these so-called Fanatron, or whatever these tubes are. This is from the Bedini collection. He used this with some of his Rife machine experiments, and it's a two-terminal gas tube with whatever gas mixture. And as you can see, it's not elevated all the way between these potential coils that are facing inward, which is the induction mode, to induce something into the gases. And you can see that there's a neutral plane showing up, not just that different color of gas right in the middle, but there's actually a black line. And
you can see, move it back and forth.
Yeah, it has a preference for definitely the middle.
So it's interesting, these type of tubes seem to glow quite well, but only against the glass when they're in the neutral plane.
Try that one.
Yeah, if I look straight down the middle of it,
Yeah.
the center of it's dead.
Oh, okay.
It's it's a tube all the way down.
Yeah.
Oh. Well, there's your first step to fusion. Little suns.
Oh, be careful. Oh, there we go.
Okay.
Can you share that, Brother Martin, or do you want me to?
I want you to share it. You've seen them, right?
Oh yeah, we built them. Well, built them. They still build them. They're just an older model, you know, but they can do upgrades all the time. But these are basically a Keely craft. If you read the book called The Airship of John Keely, again, this is not in print, so you may have a hard time getting a hold of it. But I only know where there's one copy now, and it's not here with me, so I can't easily share pages, pictures, whatever. But he shows the cylinder-shaped craft. It's rounded on both ends, and it's basically got a neutral cylinder, a neutral, what did he call it? A neutral something, center. He called it a neutral center. That's what Keely called it, and we still call it. It's basically the closest thing in modern physics is a singularity, but it's not really right either, or a black hole. That's not right. There are no singularities, there are no black holes. That's baloney. That I'm pretty convinced that there are none. But anyway, there is something called a neutral center, and Keely did learn to use those for, and they do appear in nature, and it's like a miniature sun, much more powerful than a regular sun. But some suns are quite powerful out there in space. And anyway, these things can be controlled, and they basically support the whole ship with huge amounts of ability to lift weight, huge amounts of weight. And they put one on both ends, so it gives you, any 360-degree rotation in any axis on all three ends. And they also produce an artificial gravity. And that's how these ships work. They were first built in 1890s. I think it was 1890 or 1892, the World's Fair. I don't know, you'd have to look it up to see what it was. It was either 1890 or 1892. There was a World's Fair. Keely was demonstrating 13 spheres that he would play a single note or whistle a single note, and the spheres would come to life. They were sitting there on the stage, and they would all suddenly levitate up about 6 feet off the ground, 5 to 6 feet off the ground, and just go in a slow orbit around each other, with one of them being in the center and almost stationary, but it was rotating on its axis. It's exactly the same. and but the other 12 were all the same distance from the center. So that's slightly different than the solar system. But these things would sit there and move continuously, and our audience could come up and try to pull one out of its orbit, and they could not budge it. This is well documented that he did this demo back in at the World's Fair, 1890 or 1890. He was hired by the super rich bankers, and everything went top secret. And one of the first secret cities or secret facilities was Cheyenne Mountain, and they started building. In Colorado these things, and these things were seen all over Colorado and Arizona, and those in the 1890s. And they took trips to the moon and Mars in the 1890s using Keely craft. So these things have been around, some of the oldest craft. Although Keely did have a personal flying saucer as well, it was about 16 feet in diameter, and it used he built that in the 1870s before he did these other demos. And it used something a little bit like a gyroscope, but much more advanced as far as able to take shape and lift as well. I'll take stability, I meant to say, to the center of the craft. So that was his work before he figured out how to use neutral centers to lift craft. And the neutral center, of course, gives you shields as well, and it gives you gravity as well. So that's an advantage over the earlier model. And the one we're building here is similar to the earlier one that Keely did. But it'll be a lot of fun, regardless. So that's the story behind it. There's a lot of more details I'm leaving out, but that's the general story behind it. And yeah.
By 1885, Keely had almost complete command of all the known forces of the phenomenal universe. With his machinery, he could generate magnetism in any substance, levitate any substance by controlling gravity, etherealize, reduce to energy any substance, and accurately explain all the atomic forces known to our modern science but unknown in his time. Keely was finishing his theory on color and sound and could see the time when he would be able to publish his system and have the proper apparatus for demonstration and analysis of all the progressive links of transmissive sympathy from the crude molecular to the high etheric. Even the journals had ceased to ridicule, and some were stating to publish on the possibilities lying hidden in the discovery of an unknown force. After a lifetime of researching the laws governing the vibrations which produce etheric force, Keely believed that the power he tapped was the governing medium of the universe. This force controls the advance and recession of the sun and planets in their movements across the heavens. It reigns in the mineral, vegetable, and animal kingdoms and is the common for regulating all. Keely proved in demonstration that matter can be subdivided by different orders of vibration. Each subdivision evolves entirely new and distinct elements. He was able to analyze 7 distinct levels of subdivision. Perhaps this is an affirmation of the occultists who have proclaimed that there are 7 levels of universal energy. Present atom smashers with their billion-volt power levels have nothing new on Keely's harmonious control and subdivision of matter. He showed that all sympathetic streams of energy are composed of triple currents of vibratory flows. This applies to magnetic, electric, gravital, and cerebellic, brain and mind, flows. These laws govern all molecular masses from the innermost subdivision of the atom to the galaxies and universe itself. These flows radiate from suns and stars to planets on down the scale to the very core of the atoms. Since these flows are vibrational in nature and tuned to their respective spheres, Keely believed this was the basis for the term music of the spheres. Gravity is actually a triple connective radiation rather than a flow. It is an eternally existing force entering all forms of matter. Keely believed that gravity is the basic source form which all matter emerges. Keely called the stream of energy coming into the earth at the poles from the sun the polar stream. The 3 currents of force in this pole stream are magnetism, electricity, and gravity. The first neutral center ships were 30 to 40 feet in diameter and about 100 feet long. This would fit the description of the Tic Tac UFO. They have been built any size, even miles long. They traveled as far as they could into space with the early ships, reaching the moon before 1900 and going as far as Mars in the early 1900s. The miniature sun. Popular science would have you believe that the sun is a plasma ball powered by nuclear fusion reactions in its core. This theory is questionable at best. The sun is a plasma ball, but it is probably hollow inside. There is no nuclear fusion reactor at its core. A sunspot is where the sun's plasma has a hole in it. Sunspots reveal the dark inside of the sun. A miniature sun can be created with high-voltage direct current, metal hemispheres, and magnetism. It is similar to a plasma ball, or ball lightning. With a miniature sun at each end of the craft, a neutral center forms in the center of the craft. This is the basis of operation of the Keely neutral center craft.